Hello and welcome to another edition of Shaka Extra Time. I am Paul Ndiho. Joining me on set live is Shaka Sali himself, aka the Kavale Kid. Hello, Shaka.
Hello, Paul.
How are you?
Usually terrific.
Today, we will be talking about some issues happening on the continent. But before we go there, a warm welcome to you, all our Facebook followers are watching us live. Shaka Extra Time is a show that comes to you every Tuesday. And today, let's maybe start off in North Africa, in Egypt, where, as we speak, some African leaders are meeting there to talk about what's happening in the two Sudans, North Sudan and South Sudan. Your thoughts on that, Shaka?
I think that they are doing the thing really that needs to be done, and perhaps even most urgently, especially given that you have had a very bad situation in South Sudan. They have been having a civil war, they have been fighting, agreeing on some peace deals and this kind of stuff, and some of those peace deals have not been holding. And then, of course, you do have some significant changes in Khartoum as a result of civil society, professional bodies, and young people going to the streets and essentially exercising really their democratic right, which is they have found out that they have a right to own an opinion that is different from the authorities that were in power.
Speaking about young people, professional associations staging a protest in Sudan, these guys have refused to vacate the premises of the army headquarters. They've been there since April 6, if I'm correct on that one, saying that we are not leaving this place unless if the military council meets our demands. And it looks like they might end up actually meeting some of their demands.
Well, I think that they are right, frankly, in insisting that this is not a change of guards. This is, in a sense, a sort of revolution, really, led by young people, professional people, and civil society, and some elements, in fact, within the military. The young people, the junior officers and all that kind of stuff, they felt that the conditions were ripe for change because they had had one man calling the shots for the last, more than 30 years. And, when you think about it, Omar Bashir presided essentially about the disintegration of what we knew as the Sudan. Now you have two countries and they have problems.
What could be the cause? Because they are saying that as far as they are concerned, the military council needs to do more than just saying that they're going to meet their demands. They actually want every one of those guys involved in previously in the government to be out. But on the other hand, I think that the two actually need each other because there's no way these guys are going to come and take over power without the help of the military.
They need each other. They definitely need each other in the sense that the civilians, the leaders of civil society and what have you, should get into very serious and urgent discussions with the military leadership so that they figure out how to compromise in the sense that the civilians are, by the way, backed by the African Union, which says that what they want to see constitutional kind of like order being restored. You also, in fact, have the voice of the United States of America. It says that power should be handed over, in a sense, to civilian authorities. And I think that what should be really done, at least from what I have seen in my view, considering what has been going on historically across the African continent, is that those who are going to lead the transitional government should be barred, for example, from running in the upcoming elections. Why? The reason I say that is because so that they do not have the head start the advantage of being in a situation or in a position where they could actually manipulate the system to such an extent that when you hold the elections, these elections will probably not in fact have results that reflect the will of the people, but the will of those particular authorities who control the transitional government.
Speaking about transitional governments, there seems to be a serious problem when it comes to transition. These are long-time leaders who have been there for a long time. When it comes to time, they don't plan for their exit. So we are struggling with identifying people who can lead these revolutions. For example, there are leaders who have done it successfully. You can talk about Arap Moi. Arap Moi was there for more than 2 decades. Finally figured out how to negotiate his exit. He did it. Joseph Kabila in Congo managed to figure out how to exit without, he would be in exile by now, but he figured out how to play the rules of the game and managed to negotiate his exit. Why can these other leaders maybe learn from those examples? For example, we're having a crisis in Sudan.
As a matter of fact, you're right in talking about some of those specific leaders who were able to manage their exit. But these were not the first people that did so in Africa. In fact, when you go back to the for example, 80s, you have Tanzanian founding president Julius Kambarage Nyerere essentially stepping down and choosing Ali Hassan Mwinyi to replace him. Ali Hassan Mwinyi sticking to the constitution of Tanzania, and after serving 10 years, replaced by Benjamin Mkapa. Benjamin Mkapa sticking to the constitution and the laws of Tanzania, and after 10 years, Jakaya Mrisho Kikwete. And after Mrisho Kikwete, you have John Pombe Magufuli. That's why people talk about stability, peace, and what have you in Tanzania. And then you go to West Africa. You had the Senegalese founding president, Leopold Sédar Senghor. He also managed his exit by choosing Abdou Diouf, someone that has the distinction of having been the tallest president in the world. The tallest president actually did serve 1 term because he tried to do another term and he was very badly defeated. But the good thing and the beautiful thing about the tallest president in the world, Abdou Diouf, he actually conceded defeat with grace. And then the man that beat him, Abdoulaye Wade, he also served. He tried to shift the constitutional political goalpost and it didn't quite work. He was defeated by Macky Sall. Also, like his predecessor, considered defeat with grace, went home. And so really you have a sort of democracy being consolidated in Senegal, in Tanzania. And then you have a place like Ghana, which was, a country that experienced so many types of military coups. But it wasn't until you get Flight Lieutenant Jerry John Rawlings, retired but certainly not tired, that after 2 coups, he eventually laid ground really that in a sense has actually made him be considered to be a transformational African leader, because the democracy is maturing in Ghana. In fact, when I think about democracy maturing in Ghana, and in fact it is maturing, I think that Ghanaians should not be selfish democratically. Perhaps, in fact, what they should do, just like their first founding president and prime minister, the Osajefo, Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, on March 6, 1957, when he regained political independence from the Gold Coast to Ghana, he challenged the entire nation by saying that the independence of Ghana would be meaningless unless it was linked with the total liberation of Africa. And Paul, Dr. Kwame Nkrumah did not simply talk the talk. He actually walked the talk by providing the necessary tools and support to those other African countries and his colleagues who were struggling and fighting for freedom. And you know, with 1994, South Africa becoming a multiracial democratic society under the leadership of the Madiba, the late Nelson Mandela, the dream for Kwame Nkrumah was fulfilled. And Ghana, in a sense, should now talk about how democracy is not good enough only for Ghana, but that perhaps, in fact, democracy is good for the entire continent. And therefore, Ghanaian authorities should figure out a way sincerely of somehow selling that ideal so that the entire Africa can buy into it.
How about critics who say that, for example, that these long-time leaders, some people call them dictators who have been in power for a long time, that they keep on saying that they are the vision. They have the vision for their country. They're the only leaders who can lead their countries at prosperity. But then there's also another school of thought that says maybe these leaders should take cue from the examples of Robert Mugabe, the example of Omar al-Bashir, that there comes a time when you need to select or appoint a successor to take on from when you're gone, because these countries are going through crises simply because they did not find a possible successor.
Paul, I think that you are really being very kind, because if in fact they were leaders, they would probably be listening to their people. They would be listening to the voices of their people, who, by the way, in terms of democracy, are supposed to be the primary stakeholders, and therefore, in fact, their bosses. So they wouldn't really be in this situation where they would begin to exaggerate the idea of being uniquely, gifted, or perhaps being politically God's gifts to their own countries. These are rulers. They are rulers, and therefore they actually impose themselves upon their people. But as you said, it's probably a high time, and it would be very, very, very wise really for some of these individuals to learn from some of the examples that are provided for example, Omar Bashir. He was a field marshal. He had been in charge of power, presiding, in fact, over the largest nation on the African continent, until he actually ended up presiding over its splitting into two countries. He also transformed the country into a sort of pariah nation, to the extent that a country that was once very rich, had very, very proud people, was actually
very strong economy.
Yeah,
until recently.
Almost on its knees, really. That's not a very good example. That's not something that, frankly, some of these leaders would want to emulate.
Let me add that last weekend they found tons and tons of money, in the millions of dollars, over $130 million, over 5 billion Sudanese pounds, just to name but a few.
Yeah, but really, what is that in a way? I mean, let's face it. When you seize power, you take power by means that, in fact, give you a situation where you impose yourself upon your people. You are just like a combination of a thief and a murderer. You take over a country, it is like having the moral equivalent of a house or a land title. You have a country title that allows you, for example, to get loans from the Bretton Woods institution. We're talking about the International Monetary Fund. to get loans, millions of dollars and what have you from the World Bank. You can do almost anything with it. So if somebody has in fact stolen a country, what is this business about having a million, some millions, tens of millions of dollars in cash in hard currency? Omar al-Bashir is not the only person that has been in that position and has been found having that type of, the kind of money. You have the late Nigerian military dictator,
Sani Abacha.
Sani Abacha. Guess how much money they found in his house in Abuja? We're talking about millions and millions and millions of pounds sterling, millions and millions of euros, millions and millions of US dollars. Plus, in fact, he had very, very fat, deep Swiss, some other European bank accounts when a lot of Nigerians are going hungry.
That's interesting. Let's go to the comments, Shaka. Let's start with Jeffers Kasangula. Do you believe military coups are resurging in Africa? Is that something that we are going to be used to seeing now?
No. Fortunately, we probably are not going to be experiencing that type of situation thanks to the fact that the African Union, for example, plus the international community will not do business as usual with somebody that seizes power through a military coup. What has happened lately is that some of these long-term rulers, some might call them dictators, have become so smart that they actually go about using different paths to hang on to power. One of the paths they take is to hold elections, which in fact are not elections, which are selections really, which are a facade. They hold elections which they cannot lose. They must win because they appoint, for example, officials who are going to man their electoral commissions and people, therefore, at the end of the day, who are going, in fact, to be counting the votes. And these people have allegiance. They owe allegiance to the appointing authority, not to their people. And so what happens, I think, really right now is that the international community, and perhaps led by, in fact, the African Union, if it were possible, should also call out some of these African rulers who are in the business of essentially holding elections which are a facade, taking people through the motions, spending a lot of money unnecessarily and what have you, when in fact all they are doing is trying to figure out a way to circumvent constitutions so that they can just hang on to power. The international community, the African Union, should say it loud and clear that if in fact you are going to change a constitution which you use in fact to be sworn into office as a president, what you say is that you will protect, preserve, and defend. If at some point you choose to decide, for example, to change this constitution for personal or political gain, the international community should refuse to do business as usual with you. Because sincerely, this is in a way a political coup. In fact, it is a treason, really.
But Shaka, there is a comment here, and is reacting to some of the stuff you're saying. The current chairman of African Union, the Egyptian president, Abdullah Fattah Sisi, literally took over a democratically elected government. Today, he's the current head of African Union. So how is African Union going to call out dictators like him if he's heading that institution as we speak?
You're right. I think that what will probably happen if that has to actually be the case, they will probably have to be pressured by what are called development partners. Because for the most part, how, for example, they arrived at the principle of deciding not to recognize military coups, it was the result of external pressure.
Is it more of a selective thing? Because if they talk about a military coup, what happened in Egypt was a military coup. Sisi taking over power from the Muhammad Morsi.
You are right. You are right. It was a military coup, and as a matter of fact, you know, in fairness to the African Union at that particular time, it refused to do business as usual with Mr. Al-Sisi Fatah, the Egyptian president. The Americans, in fact, are the ones who had the problem. They could not call it a military coup. But for the AU, they actually did, and eventually, of course, Sisi ended up organizing the same type of elections that are facades, really, that are an illusion in a way, taking the people of Egypt through the political motions. Sisi, for example, you said earlier, is actually holding talks to help mediate the problems in Sudan and in South Sudan. I think the message is very good. The problem is he in fact a good messenger?
The jury is still out there on that question. Let's go to Uganda. A lot of people want you to talk about what's happening in Uganda, both the political crisis, what's happening. They see opposition leaders being arrested left and right. The U.S. government has weighed in, said that maybe they should allow these guys to express their God-given rights. But is really the U.S. the right country to be calling for people, opposition leaders in Uganda to express their opinions?
I think that the U.S. has a legitimate right to make such a statement because it is considered, for example, to be one of Uganda's key foreign supporters. It provides Uganda aid. It is part of what is called a development partner of Uganda. And I think, to be honest with you, Paul, a lot of these elections which are being held or conducted in what I would characterize as democratically challenged countries, these elections, in fact, are held for the benefit of development partners, not for the benefit, really, of the primary stakeholder, who are the legitimate citizens of those countries. The reason is very simple. The authorities in those African countries that are democratically challenged needed to continue accessing aid. And in order for their development partners to continue providing that type of aid, they, at home, in their headquarters, they need to justify that sort of support to their own people, that they are in fact promoting democracy. And yet, it is very, very hypocritical because for the most part, they know exactly what the truth is. I think that when you come to Uganda, at the end of the day, it is up to the Ugandan people. The question is, are they sufficiently aware of the power, the inalienable rights that they in fact have? Do they know, for example, the relationship between themselves and this thing called the government? Do they know, for example, that they are actually the bosses of the president of Uganda, for example, of the Chief Justice of Uganda, of the ministers of Uganda, of ambassadors and what have you? If they did, they would definitely act. But unfortunately, the way the relationship is on the ground, it looks like the other way around. They behave, rather than behaving like citizens who owe allegiance to the state and therefore have, in fact, constitutional rights, inalienable rights, birthrights, if you will. They actually behave as subjects who owe allegiance to an individual authority who can be a presidential monarch, who can be essentially a dictator. And they obviously end up, some of them receiving what I would call privileges rather than exercising rights.
Very briefly, a comment about the arrest of Bobi Wine. The government says that Bobi Wine is using his concerts to, in a way, they have sort of become political rallies. That when he's doing his music concerts, he's not actually singing, but he's on a campaign rally. Your thoughts?
What is very interesting is that the last time I checked, when I read a copy of the Ugandan constitution, you will be surprised that it actually guarantees freedoms, including freedom of expression. And this is something that Bobi Wine is actually trying to put in practice. It's a contradiction in terms. I think at the end of the day, Ugandans, like I said, need to wake up. They need, for example, to learn from some other human experiences. They need to look at their brothers and sisters, what they did in Khartoum. They need to look at their brothers and sisters, what they did some years ago in Burkina Faso.
Are you calling on Ugandans to rise up and take...
I am not calling on Ugandans to rise up. What I am saying, I am calling on them, in a sense, to assert their constitutional rights. And that is reflected, for example, in having the right, for example, to protest, having the right, for example, to own an opinion that may be different from the ruling party or the authorities.
What are you talking about tomorrow on Straight Talk Africa?
Tomorrow we are going to be visiting Ethiopia. We are going to be looking at Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed. He's been in here for about 1 year now, so we'll be looking at a sort of report card which will be giving us the opportunity to talk about some of the challenges that he has encountered and he continues to encounter, and some of the successes, if any, that he has registered.
How do you respond, very briefly, how do you respond to critics who say that he talks the talk, but he doesn't walk the talk, the walk?
I don't know about that. I think that everybody, as I often say, is entitled to their different opinions, but certainly not their different sets of facts. And so tomorrow we'll try with the panelists to find out whether in fact it is true that the man is talking the talk without walking the talk. We hope that we'll get an opportunity to answer your question.
Very briefly, what should Sudan people do at this point?
Sudanese people?
Yes.
Yeah, I think they should continue to exercise their constitutional right. But they should definitely enter into serious and urgent negotiations with the military authorities so that together, you know, there is a saying that as an individual, you can run very fast. But guess what? Together, you can go very far.
Well, on that note, Shaka, thank you so much for this, for your insight. We look forward to hosting you on another edition of Shaka Extra Time. Until then, thank you so much from Washington. Our goodbyes to you all.
You're most welcome.